Crossing the Abyss. One Man's Descent. Life hadn't worked out for Simon. It would be fair to say he considered himself an unlucky man in many ways. He believed he had kind of an Anti-Midas touch, where everything he touched turned to disaster. As a child, he had unintentionally set fire to an entire field when trying to light a stick with a magnifying glass. The subsequent fire took hold so quickly he had to be rescued by a passer-by who heard him coughing through the smoke. The fire crews took 2 hours to put the fire out, and the local papers were all over the story with the headline, "Climate Change, Unseasonably Hot Weather Ignites Local Field, Nearly Killing 10-Year-Old Boy." In truth, Simon was relieved, as no one even considered it had been him who had started the fire. This wasn't the only unfortunate event in Simon's early years. When he was 15, he was walking through town with his friends, slightly worse for wear after drinking 2 bottles of cider an hour earlier, when a girl he liked waved at him from across the road. In a bid to look cool, Simon vaulted the barrier and caught his feet on the top, causing him to land face first onto the road. This on its own was embarrassment enough for any teenager. However, he hadn't seen the van, which had to swerve to avoid running over his head, and subsequently crashed through the butcher's shop window on the opposite side of the road. He spent the night in accident and emergency, getting the gaping hole his front teeth had opened in his lower lip stitched, before attending the local police station the following morning to be charged with being drunk and disorderly. The court case produced a hefty fine for criminal damage, which his parents had to pay. The list of regrettable events was a long one, and Simon generally laughed them off eventually with his friends. In truth, these unlucky points in his life didn't dampen his enthusiasm and general good humour. He was popular among his peers and was always up for a laugh or to take part in questionable activities when they had drunk a little too much. It could be said that Simon was a normal teenager with a stable home life and great friendships growing up. Simon was now 25, and for the last couple of years had been through a multitude of differing circumstances, ranging from job losses all the way to relationship breakdown and financial crisis. These events, when looked at through the eyes of an adult, had destroyed him mentally. And even though friends would try, he had been unable to laugh them off as unfortunate. In his opinion, when considering the events of his life, he was cursed. And that belief had led him to this location. The river below him was swollen with the rainfall from the last 3 days. It rushed underneath him quickly, carrying debris in its murky brown waters. All it would take is a single step forward, and all this would come to a cold, watery end. His mind raced with possible outcomes. No longer was there an internal argument for not killing himself. Now it was all questions about how long it would take and what it would feel like. He knew it wouldn't take long to drown, as he couldn't swim. His fear of deep water manifesting itself during his early years, when he had been taking swimming lessons, but after diving into the deep end to impress his dad, he lost his trunks and then had to be rescued by the lifeguard as the panic of not finding the bottom of the pool with his feet and the sudden intake of water as he screamed led his parents to decide swimming was something he could pick up later in his life. The following years never really required him to learn, and since he never had an urge to visit a swimming pool for any other purpose than watching, he hadn't missed out on anything in his opinion. He had laughed as his friends frolicked in the water, playing silly games and dive-bombing unimpressed fellow holidaymakers when they were in Ibiza. Latterly, he had spent holidays in Florida with his ex-fiancée, Wendy, where he had refused many times to join her in the pool. Even when she had promised sexual rewards for getting in at night with her, he had still said no. In truth, standing there, watching the torrent of water pass beneath, he considered many of his interactions with Wendy over their 5-year relationship. How had it all gone so badly? They loved each other, but even that turned out to be not enough to keep them together. They had met in a local bar on one of the many weekend benders Simon liked to partake in. She was out with her friends from the solicitors she worked at, and when he saw her, she was dancing next to the Deal or No Deal bandit, dressed in the tightest of blue dresses. Her curves were the focal point of every man in there. In normal run of play, Simon wouldn't approach women. He had this cheeky boy grin, so he had been told, that seemed to attract them to him. So approaching this vision was new territory for him. He had tried to act uninterested as he nonchalantly slotted a pound coin into the bandit, then tried incredibly hard to concentrate as the wheels spun. 2 spins later, and the lights began to flash. "You should gamble," she said, as Simon's hand hovered over the start button to spin the wheels again. He hadn't really noticed the fact he had the chance of winning £3 or gamble to 4. "Why don't you gamble for me? If I win, I'll buy you a drink. How does that sound?" he said, with his best cheeky smile. "What if you lose? Will you still buy me a drink?" she replied, as she stroked his arm. It was like electricity shooting through him. He took a deliberate breath to calm himself and inhaled her scent for the first time. The perfume was so sweet and delicate, it reminded him of something, but he couldn't put his finger on it. A sweet shop, maybe. No, it was more intense than that. As he struggled with an answer, she hit the gamble button. "I will take the silence as agreement," she said, as the wheel in the top of the bandit began to spin. Her hand remained on his arm, and Simon wished the wheel would spin forever. Later that night, they had found a secluded back street and had the most amazing sex he had ever had. From that point forward, they had been inseparable. For 2 amazing years, they had partied, drank, had sex in all kinds of locations, and lived life to the fullest. He had, in his mind, found the one. She was his soulmate, a woman who made life seem fantastic, no matter what happened. Things had happened, but with her, he knew he had someone who would look after him. He had proposed on their 2nd-year anniversary. She said yes, but Simon felt she was a little underwhelmed by the whole proposal and getting married thing. He put it down to his unromantic approach to the question, and figured if he had the chance again, he would likely not get down on one knee in the middle of a restaurant full of onlookers. He recalled the day he discovered her in their bed with Jude, the new solicitor from her work. It had broken his heart standing at the door. They were, at first, unaware of his presence, yet he didn't feel the desire to interrupt. His insecurities triggered to the point where he convinced himself that this infidelity was his own fault for being inadequate in the bedroom. Perhaps it was only fair Wendy enjoyed sex, as she was clearly at that point, with someone who could satisfy her. He had leant against the door as the weight of the situation hit him, the noise catching the attention of the lovers. The first words to leave Wendy's lips were not an apology, no statement of innocence or defense. She calmly lifted the covers to cover her nakedness and said, "What the hell are you doing here?" Simon blinked several times in response to this question as he considered his reply. It was his house. He had lived here before they had met. Wendy moved in 6 months after their relationship had started. "I live here," was all he could come up with. Jude had begun to get dressed as the inevitable shouting and recriminations were about to start. He had made the decision he didn't want to hang around. Simon watched him pull on his jeans over his tight bottom before slipping his t-shirt over his clearly worked-out body. This man was everything Simon wasn't. He was athletic and toned, as opposed to Simon's flabby physique that he had neglected for many years. "I'm sorry, mate," Jude said, as he squeezed past him at the bedroom door before rushing out of the house as fast as his cycling legs could carry him. Wendy looked furious at Simon's interruption. Clearly, she hadn't expected him home. After all, he was supposed to be in Newcastle until the following day. He had received the news his meeting was cancelled as he headed up the M6 towards T-Bay services. The idea of surprising his partner had been one he looked forward to, stopping to pick up a cup of tea and some flowers before turning the car around to head back down the motorway. At no point during his journey had he expected to find this. "Is that all you can say for yourself?" Wendy asked as he continued to process his discovery. "Why?" Again, Simon's vocabulary let him down as his brain refused to allow intelligent questions to be formed. He could feel a burning anger beginning to boil in his gut, though, which he knew wouldn't take very long to surface. "Because it's exciting. He makes me feel good," Wendy said, without a single hint of apology or remorse. There it was, the trigger his rage was waiting for. "You what?" Simon screamed. "Exciting? Are you delirious?" He turned, then punched the unsuspecting door as hard as he could, leaving a huge hole in the panel and a deep cut in his hand. "This is the reason!" she screamed, pointing at the now shattered door panel. "Your mood swings are so draining, I can't keep up with them," Wendy argued. "Mood swings? What are you talking about?" Simon could feel the blood dripping from his hand as the throbbing intensified, but he ignored it. "You've been moody for ages. It's very tiring for me as I don't know who I'm coming home to. Jude, listen to me. Look, I am sorry you found out this way, but you really haven't been paying me any attention lately, so is it really a surprise?" Wendy said as she rearranged the blankets around her. "I've been depressed, you know that. It was you who made me seek help from the doctor. I'm on medication for anxiety and stress. I am not moody. I have a mental illness." Simon threw open his hands and blood splattered the wall. "I know," Wendy began as she screwed up her face at the sight of the blood now running down the previously pristine white wall. "I feel awful for you, but you really have been quite selfish lately. I'm sorry, I don't know why I did it. I just wanted some fun. You know what I mean?" She let the covers drop. Simon couldn't help but take in the beauty of her. "I'm sure I can make it up to you," she said invitingly. Disgusted, Simon turned to leave the room. His hand was now bleeding quite heavily. He knew from the pool he had left that getting some kind of medical attention would likely be the best thing right now. Plus, he needed to leave before he did something he would regret. "Where are you going, Simon?" he heard Wendy call from the bed. He didn't answer, just grabbed his car keys, left the house, and headed for A&E. The fallout from the betrayal had a lasting impact on his stability, as it added another issue for him to try to deal with. He had been dealing with many problems at work. He wasn't enjoying the role he was asked to do and felt undervalued. Because of this, the feeling of impending dismissal always seemed to be hanging over his head. Now, with his hand injury, along with his recent split from Wendy, his mental state descended into blackness, which, in turn, impacted his work. He just lost interest, becoming very frustrated with colleagues over insignificant issues. It wasn't long before HR called him into a meeting with his line manager, Graham, where they explained his role was no longer required and that, given the circumstances, it would be better if he left the business. Graham, who Simon had confided in over his relationship breakup, mentioned it would be good for him as, "You can take some time to sort your head out." As if being fired was somehow them doing him a favour. It had been 3 months from the moment of Wendy's betrayal to him walking into his now empty house without a job, without a partner, and without the desire to live. This was a pivotal moment in Simon's life, as up until that point he had always found a reason to argue with the thought that it would all be better if he just committed suicide. Now, as he considered ending it all, he couldn't find a single reason not to do it. So, with no internal objection, he began planning how best to put an end to his misery. His mum came over the next day for a chat. His dad had mentioned he'd lost his job after a family friend had seen Simon leaving his office with a box of belongings in his hands, looking miserable. This was enough for the woman to be able to put two and two together. "Listen, son, it seems bleak, but you're such a clever boy, you'll get something else quickly. Why don't you get yourself out, eh? Let your hair down with your mates. It'll all work out, I promise," his mum had said. This pep talk didn't really make him feel better, but he smiled and thanked her for coming around. "It's a good idea, Mum. I think I will," he had promised. After all, there was no sense making her feel bad too. "Simon, your father and I love you very much. There's a lot of things in this life seem like they will overwhelm us, but you must keep focused on the fact that everything in this world is temporary." It was a mantra of his mother's, which she had picked up from a passage she had found on Google when she had been looking for something to post on her Facebook page. Simon sat for a moment to reflect on the quote. "Nothing is permanent. Everything is subject to change. Being is always becoming," he whispered. It was ingrained in his mind, as she had told him this whenever he felt down about one thing or another. "That's right," his mum replied. "You just need to focus on the fact that it will get better. Don't let this grind you down, love." Simon thought about the conversation for a long while after his mum had left. He was fixated on the things that had gone wrong. Perhaps the Buddha was right. Everything is just a stage of change. He pulled out his mobile, then sent messages to his friends. A night out may well be the best thing to pull him out of the doldrums. The night out was blurred in his memory. It had started out slowly, with a couple of pints down the old nag's head. What started as a quiet drink slowly became a melting pot of resentment for Simon as he unloaded his problems onto his friends, who weren't really in the right state to provide supportive feedback. "That bloke, Jude," he spat. "He thinks he's so special. If I saw him, I'd jump on his head for what he did to me," he commented before downing the last of his 7th or 8th pint. Usually, when his mates were sober, this would have provided a completely sensible response. They would be telling him that he shouldn't lower himself to that level, but what he received as advice was, "You're dead right, mate. Where does the scumbag live? We should go slash his tyres or something." There was a solidarity in the threat, a show that they were fully on board with his suffering and that the target of his ire should receive some type of punishment. This conversation remained with Simon for the rest of the night. Long after his friends had forgotten all about the exchange, as they were only interested in more alcohol or trying to get the attention of some girls dancing nearby in the nightclub they found themselves in. His mind repeated the scenario which he believed had been the root cause of all his current issues, the moment he walked into that room and found them together. Certain embellishments had been added in the intervening weeks. Now his brain was filled with alcohol-fueled logic. The scene included a smug grin, as well as Jude flaunting his perfect physique, specifically his larger-than-normal manhood. As he staggered towards the taxi rank, pizza in hand, he made a decision. "Where to, pal?" the driver asked. 15 minutes later, he had paid the £27 fare, then waited as the car left the cul-de-sac. Satisfied he was alone, he turned his attention to a pristine Volkswagen Transporter van outside the house he'd been dropped off at. He reached out to try the doors tentatively, before missing them entirely, resulting in him falling to the ground next to it, the copious amounts of alcohol suddenly impairing his ability to balance. "Shh!" he whispered to himself, as he abandoned the now empty pizza box to haul himself back to his feet using the door handle of the van. To his amazement, it opened, leaving him momentarily stunned, as he didn't think it would be, and back on the ground, looking up into the car. His drunken mind raced. Options came and went, but only one stuck around long enough to push him into action. He'd needed the toilet for a while, so why not kill two birds with one stone, was the justification for what he did next. Slowly and purposefully, he dragged himself up from the floor, then began fumbling with the fly on his jeans. "This will teach him for what he did. He's soiled my life. So I—" The sound of water hitting leather was music to his drunken ears. "Will soil his beloved car." Relieved, and somewhat satisfied at the puddle of urine on the driver's seat, he examined the door before climbing over the chair to the passenger side to explore the glove compartment, being careful not to touch the present he had left as he clambered across the car. Inside, he found a small box with bike tools in it. "Perfect discovery," he slurred. The police found Simon passed out in the bushes 300 meters down the road. He had stopped to catch his breath following the loud, unexpected bang from the tire when he'd stabbed it, which had triggered the flight instinct. They weren't meant to do that, he'd thought as he ran. The court case was humiliating, as the owner of the transporter wasn't even Jude. He had gone to the wrong house to vandalize a perfectly innocent man's car. He received community service and a £1,200 fine for the damages to the car. Everything snowballed from that point. His mental health descended to its deepest point as the mountain of bills he couldn't pay continued to arrive. Finances as they were, it wasn't a surprise to receive legal documents from his mortgage provider detailing how, since he had failed to make any payments in the last 8 months, coupled with his lack of communication over the matter, he had ignored every letter. They were left with no other option than to repossess the house. 12 months on from the betrayal, he was a criminal, jobless, and, after today, a homeless man, without a single penny in his bank account. He couldn't ask his parents for help. In truth, they were unaware of him losing his house, as he had been unable to find the right time to tell them. Every time he had spoken to them, he had lied. He found it easier to hide behind these untruths than to look them in the eyes and be honest. So, with £37.43 in his pockets, he set off for a walk. He had no idea where he was going, but knew he had to get away from everything that reminded him of what a complete failure he was. Carrying what he could fit into a rucksack, he closed the door behind him, then posted the keys through the letterbox. He didn't need to do this, but felt it provided some finality that allowed him to detach himself from his old home, as he could no longer get in. He had been walking for the last 3 weeks, sleeping when he was tired on whatever he could find that provided some support. His funds had lasted only 3 days, so he resorted to drinking from public toilet facilities or stealing bottles of water, along with food, from any store he came across. He had crossed the bridge he was standing on earlier in the week, before the rain had come. He'd stopped then to look down to the river, a few hundred feet below, with its protruding rocks diverting the flowing water. He had considered jumping, but his nerve wasn't there. However, after being drenched, hungry, and without any more than 3 hours' sleep per night since that day, he had found new resolve to end everything. Simon had arrived 10 minutes earlier and had clambered over the railing to the ledge carefully. The irony of this hadn't escaped him, and he had chastised himself more than once as he felt unsteady. "You want to jump off? What difference would it make if you bloody slipped and fell?" Below, the rivers raged over the now submerged rocks he had seen earlier that week. The sound of rushing water could be heard clearly, even from this distance. Looking at the brown river topped with white peaks, Simon's stomach lurched. It was a long way to fall. It would be very easy to just jump. Everything would be over. Your life ended, a woman's voice said. Simon looked up to look for the person speaking to him, but no one was there. Convinced he was hearing things, he took a deep breath to steady himself as he would just step off. After a few seconds, he opened his eyes to see he hadn't moved. He was still stood on the ledge, holding tightly onto the bridge's railing, with the river rolling past him underneath. It was a confusing moment, as he was sure he was going to just jump off. Strange, isn't it? It was that same voice. Again he searched for the owner of the words, but not another soul was anywhere near him. Is it all really that bad? Did you want to throw your life away? The voice asked. Who is that? Panic filled his voice as he stumbled from his precarious perch, grabbing the railing with his arm to halt his fall into the water below. You see, your instinct kicked in just then. You don't really want to die. You were just lost, the woman's voice said. Who is that? Where are you? Simon called out. Let me guide you, and I promise all will work itself out. Nothing you have done is insurmountable. Mistakes can be learned from. But you have to trust me to take you away from this place to somewhere you can become better than you are now, the voice replied. Listen, I don't know what's going on, but I think it's probably a lack of sleep, or the fact I haven't eaten properly in weeks. My mind is packing in, he said as he scanned the bridge again to satisfy his own conclusion. Yeah, that's it. My mind has given up on me too. I can't blame it, to be fair. If you jump, you will spend an eternity wondering why you did. Believe me, I know, the voice whispered. Simon felt a hand brush his face. It was so gentle he almost missed it. I know you think this is what you want, but if you do this, you will never know what could have been if you had just spoken to someone. Holding this inside and carrying the burden alone feels excruciatingly difficult, the voice whispered. Simon tried to ignore it and began focusing on the water below. His breathing had increased as well as his heart rate. All you need is a helping hand and a chance that I didn't have. Simon looked around again. This time he saw a young girl standing next to him. Her face had tears running down it, and her blue eyes were filled with compassion as she looked back at him. Look, watch where you're standing. This isn't a safe place to be, he said as he reached out towards her. You don't want to fall off, so why don't you just climb back over the railing? I will give you a hand. Don't move, he asked as he edged slowly towards her. As his foot touched the ledge, it slipped. He grabbed onto the railings for dear life as he quickly regained his footing. Looking back to where the girl had been, he found only an empty bridge. He was alone. He looked down and scanned the water below. Hello, he called. All you need is time. A small delay to your plans so you can make the right decision, the girl's voice said, and Simon frantically scanned around him looking for the source. Where are you? He called. I thought you had jumped or fallen. Silence. All he could hear was the wind rushing around his ears as the rain began to fall again. A second or two later, he decided he was hallucinating or something, and that the sooner he got this over with, the better. With that, he turned and jumped. He wasn't waiting this time for any voice in his head to argue or try to convince him not to do it. His eyes were wide as the adrenaline flooded his bloodstream. The wind rushed through his hair as his focus became the water below. but it wasn't getting closer. He felt a tugging on his jacket, then a bang on his legs as he was hauled back over the railing. "Bloody hell, mate! What are you trying to do? Kill yourself?" A massive man had hold of his shoulders. He was panting with the obvious effort it had taken to catch, then carry him back onto the bridge. "I saw you preparing to go, but didn't think I'd make it in time. Then you stopped to talk to yourself for a moment. I had the time to close the gap and got here just in time to grab your jacket." Simon looked at his so-called saviour with confusion. "I didn't want to be saved," he spat. "I bet you didn't. There are likely others in your position who didn't want to be saved either, but they would be glad of my help now, if you could only ask them." He pointed to the river below them. "What do you mean?" Simon asked. "I mean, there was a young girl who jumped off this bridge a few years ago. Anabel was her name. She was the sweetest of girls. Lovely blonde hair that flowed when the wind caught it. She was my niece, but no one was here to save her," he said. "She had split from her boyfriend. The scumbag had been cheating on her." The man's face twisted, as though tasting something particularly unpleasant. "None of us knew. She was heartbroken, the letter said. The pain too much for her to deal with, since she would have to see him every day. We live in a small community, you see. He didn't care, though, always looking for a bit on the side. I wish I had known, but I didn't pay much attention, you see. Kids, I thought, she'll get over it. And anyway, there's always more fish in the sea, right?" He looked at Simon before continuing. "You see, I can't ask her if she wants my help, because she can't answer. Anabel succeeded in what you were trying to do. And for what?" He looked deep into Simon's eyes. "Because life was too tough for her." He smiled at the thought. "Life isn't hard at all, really, my friend. It's our minds that convince us that it is." He tapped the side of his head for emphasis. "In here, everything that happens is over-processed. Things that were little become huge as we give them more and more thought. It's this that creates the situation, not life." The large man smiled. "We searched for days, but we never found her body. This river meets the sea 5 miles down. God only knows where she ended up." His gentle green eyes were filled with emotion as he held onto Simon's jacket as though expecting him to vault the railing if he let go. "Who are you? What do you know of my problems?" Simon demanded as he considered ditching his jacket and running. "I know you wanted to end them by jumping into the river," he replied. "When I saw you, I knew I had to stop you from making the same mistake she did. I wasn't there for her, but fate has put me here for you." He finished as he let go of Simon's jacket. Simon dropped his head. This was typical of his luck. He couldn't even kill himself properly. "I bet you have parents, right? Friends? I bet there's a lot of people who would feel the impact of what you were about to do," the man asked. Simon nodded. "Yeah, you didn't think of them, did you?" the man continued. "What you were going to do was pass your problems on to them, because you'll leave questions about what they could have done, what they should have done, whilst all the time they wouldn't be able to ask you what help you needed, because you'd have taken that option away from them." The man let go and began to straighten his own coat. Simon looked at him for the first time. He was probably in his 40s. He had a kind face with a few laughter lines around his eyes and brown hair under a baseball cap on his head. He was huge. Simon could see from the tightness of his blue and white coat that he had visited a gym more than once. Simon began to stare at his shoes as heat filled his cheeks. This was not what he had expected at all. The man lifted Simon's chin with a finger so he could look into his eyes. Staring back into those green pools filled with kindness and sympathy, Simon began to cry. Through all that had happened to him, all the pain he had felt, not once had he cried. "Let it all out, son. Don't hang on to the pain. It will eat you up from the inside, until all you are is an empty husk," the man said as he pulled Simon into an embrace. Simon's tears became sobs as he thought about his actions. He had left without a word. He knew his parents would be worried sick. They would have called all his friends, probably even Wendy, to try find out where he was. The man was right. He had been selfish. They didn't deserve this.
"You are lost, Simon. Let me guide you,"
the voice of the woman whispered in his ear. "What did you say?" Simon asked. "I said, let it all out. You don't need that pain any longer," the man said. "Come with me. My wife will have tea on the go by now. You look like you could do with a bite to eat. And a shower." Simon didn't resist as the man turned him away from the bridge before putting an arm around him as they walked towards an old grey pickup truck.
"I promise all will work itself out. Nothing you have done is insurmountable. Mistakes can be learned from. But you have to trust me to take you away from this place, to somewhere you can become better than you are now," the strange woman's voice explained as he walked away from the bridge. Simon's head spun around. "Did you hear that?" The man stopped to listen. "Hear what?" "The voice. Just then someone spoke. Didn't you hear it?"
Simon said as he frantically searched for the source of the voice. The man looked around him briefly, before looking again at Simon with sympathy in his eyes. "Come on, let's get you warmed up with a nice meal inside you. You look like hell." They reached the car, and Simon climbed into the passenger seat. "My name is Harry, by the way," Harry said as he closed his car door. "I live a few miles from here. You're lucky, as I don't come this way often. A little voice told me I should take a detour this way, and boy, I'm glad I listened." The car set off slowly and passed the spot where Simon had tried to jump. As he went by, he saw the young woman with long blonde hair sitting on the railings. She smiled at him, then waved, before disappearing over the edge.